I did. My name is Richard Wagner, and I am from Canada. Thank you for putting out on the Canadian flags. I appreciate the hospitality. I was the president of Pervala, but I sold that company last year, but I'll talk a little bit about it and what I'm doing in the automotive space today. 5 years ago, Cisco called us up, our little company, and they said, we heard you're really good with mobility and networking. We want to use your technology to get into the connected car. And of course, you get that phone call and it's like Donald Trump calling you up and saying, what do you know about walls? You don't know how to answer. So we muted it and we tried to understand what's all this talk about connected cars and autonomous vehicles. And so what I'm going to do today is talk to you a little bit about our journey and two things that we've learned about. One is a project in the city of Stratford in Ontario, Canada, which is about 4 hours down the road from here today, whereby we worked with the city of Stratford that has a mesh citywide Wi-Fi network, as well as some DSRC deployment. And what we did was we put our technology on buses and in a few AV cars, connecting everything, making it work together in one ecosystem. So I'll talk about that project, what we learned, where it went, and what the future is. And then the second thing I'll talk about is networking. And we've heard a lot of talk today about how important networking is, mobility networking, and making sure everything talks to each other, because many of us know how irritating it is if we're making a phone call and the call drops. Just think of how much more important it is if you're in a car and all this technology is relying upon each other, talking to each other, localized as well as to the community, and the call drops. What happens? We don't want to see that result. So that's what our company did. We made sure that the call did not drop. It's boring networking. Some people in our company, we just called it plumbing. And everybody here knows that plumbing should just happen and it's not a problem until something goes wrong. And I've got daughters, when the shower's not working or plumbing doesn't work, it's chaos. It's the same thing when we're talking about connected and autonomous vehicles. So this here is a slide that talks about many things that we've talked about today. Yeah, thank you. A smart city, and it's connected in many different ways. And we talked about some of the key things today, and we addressed them, such as large data collection from many sources, from the cars, from the buildings, from the community, from the pedestrian. We talked about signal priority, utilizing some of the, driving down some of the technology, making sure it works together. So one of the terms that we use is V to X, a vehicle to everything, and that includes V to V, V to I, V to P, pedestrian, and vehicle to networking. And they all have to work together. And how are they going to work together? Yes, there's localization as far as radar and car to car, but we also have all these other things happening in tandem, including when I'm walking around or my kids are walking around with their smartphones. And there's these companies called Google and Amazon, and they're very, very disruptive. And in every single device that everybody's carrying, they're getting data from you, whether you know it or not. Okay, and that data is going somewhere, and people are using that data. And we're seeing the transformation of that and a bit of a battling within the ecosystem that we've learned from the city of Stratford as to how all of these devices coexist. And we've heard a lot about putting things in roads, and then there's different schools of thoughts that say, we don't want to do that because it's costly. As Richard indicated, it's a big capital cost, and we have to justify all those taxpayer dollars. Why don't we just leapfrog that and get the data from people's phones? Because it's transmitting the radios and all these deflection points. Let's do that. So we have to factor in all of that networking. And we were battling in that space. We were working with people. We were working with the lights things. We learned a lot of things in the city of Stratford. And it's very exciting today that participants in this group include people not from only technology, because we love engineers and they're very, very important, but also the social sciences, because the learnings that we had in Stratford included both technical as well as social science, working with people, dealing with people. All of a sudden you had the head of the police department showing up saying, how is all of this going to affect my EMS? How are we going to communicate? We have to make sure that we get priority. And all of those things had to be addressed in some point within our master ecosystem involving all of these points. So Stratford, as I mentioned, is just down the road. We've done phase 1 and 2. We're moving on, and there'll be some announcements shortly in the next couple of weeks. We welcome working with Michigan State University because we think a North American free trade or North American solution is the way to go. So we welcome all opportunities. So at the end, I'll have my email. Please connect with me because there's going to be some announcements that are going to be coming down the road the next couple of weeks. We put it on buses to start. And quite simply, phase 1 was putting a connection manager on a bus so that we could communicate with a mobile network, with their existing Wi-Fi network, and with DRC deployments, as well as the localized EMS. And you have to understand the background of the city of Stratford is, and it's the only city in Stratford that's done this, and many have done it around the world as part of smart city initiatives, they deployed Wi-Fi everywhere. And when they did it, the main driver for doing it was for hydro, so that they could connect with smart meters in the city. And that was the driving mechanism to why they did that deployment. And then what they did was they said, oh, now we've got this fixed cost and it's deployed. How can we use it for businesses? How can we use it for other initiatives? Okay, because we have it out there. And they've moved down that road. In addition, along with our path, we worked with the United States Department of Transportation, putting our connection manager into their cars so that they could communicate with the different networks again, and involved with such things as getting that data and managing the privacy, giving priority to it, some of those issues. I remember when we first got into this part of the business, I did not know what DSRC stood for. So you get the call from Cisco, the next thing you know is you're Googling DSRC. Great, that's what it is. None of us had any idea. So I remember I said, we're gonna have to buy some equipment, put it on our roof, and get it in cars by next week. And everyone looked at me like, where are you from? And I said, no, we're gonna do that. So I got on the phone, I bought the equipment, I put it on the building, and I put some devices in the car, and I said, you guys are smart coders, figure it out. Make it work. Tell me where the packets are going, what the priorities are. And that's what we did. And we did that video, and of course, we sent it to Cisco. We said, we're really smart, look at this. So those are some of the things that we did in a real-life deployment. When we look at the smart city, and we've touched upon a lot of these with Andreas and Richard and the discussions that we've had, there's many factors that we're talking about. And I think the one thing that we learned with the city of Stratford is make sure you develop a plan to know which issues you're going to tackle, because there's many, many areas to tackle, okay? Whether it's traffic lights, whether it's parking, whether it's dealing with the local shops. Pick your solution and develop a plan that makes sense based on your model, based on your environment. But we touched on a lot of these things. Parking, we went down the road for parking. We came up with a great parking solution. And of course, then you have to have a parking app. And then you have to get everybody in. And next thing you know, you're talking about parking revenue. And you're having council meetings. And you're talking about what the impact is going to be and who's paying for it. Those are real issues. And a lot of those are not technical challenges, but real business. Roll up your sleeves. Does it make sense? And the one thing we learned in our journey in Stratford, whatever you do, have conviction and make sure you properly communicate it to all the parties. Marketing what you're doing is important as doing it, so that people in the community know what's going on. Because Stratford's also a unique place in that they have a festival. It's worldwide known for festivals. So we have a lot of a big arts community. Well, what's the impact in the summer when you shut down streets and you have buskers and people hanging out doing their thing in the street? What's the impact with your model? So we had to make sure that all of those people were factored into our business plan. We gave them attention, we communicated to it. So it was really quite interesting. As well as I mentioned, the EMS people. And whatever we do here, AV, CAV, make sure front and center you communicate with your emergency services people, because that's critical. And there's a huge social element of that. How are we going to talk to them? One of the projects that we were embarked on in parallel with this was from a networking standpoint. We worked with the Florida State Police Department to make sure their networks were working. and we learned a lot in Jacksonville in Florida, and we learned there's a lot of different networking issues from Alligator Alley all the way up to Jacksonville, all the way to Tampa. There's many issues. And it's great to see when I walked in here today that you had a map laid out of the different areas of the campus. Excellent. That's great. Good for you guys, because you're identifying that the entire campus is not all the same. And there's many different issues. So good for you. 5G. Everybody says 5G is going to solve all our world problems. Well, I don't know what 5G is, other than it's bigger than 4G and 3G and 2G, I guess. I'm just a dumb accountant. So what I did was I kept listening to it, and all I understand from 5G versus 4G and 2G, 3G, is there's going to be many more things connected. So the big three things for 5G, and it's important for us in our business because of networking, when we're talking networking, is number one, there's going to be a lot more virtual experience going on. And that was one of the themes at the Mobile World Congress in 2017 this year, with the introduction of that. Number two, there's going to be a lot more mission-critical Internet of Things. And we talk about smart metering, which we have in Stratford with our hydro program. And then we talk about more mission-critical Internet of Things. Okay? Vehicles connected to anything. That's pretty scary. They're connected to anything. So that's the future. And to handle that, the bottom line is we need more reliable pipes and make sure they're all working together. Here's some things. The second part that I'm going to talk to you about is the connectivity aspect of it. Okay, it's just some of the grassroots things that our company did, and we worked with Cisco and some of the other partners in the world, making sure that the connectivity to the car was put in place. Here's some things that I talked about. So we've got our cloud, and we've talked about that a lot. You're going to have mobility, 3G, 4G, 5G, LTE. You're also going to have an interaction with DSRC, dedicated short-range communication, and that can be localized as well as more wide. And then Wi-Fi deployments, as we talked about stadiums, we talked about buildings, and more urban area deployment of Wi-Fi as well, wider range. So some of the things that we did, we had an overall application management control system with over-the-air updates, making sure that you're dealing with real-time network quality, provisioning of the technology in the SIM and managing that, dealing with IP session persistence. What happens if your car goes under a bridge and you lose all that data and you get to the other end, you're not going to connect to where you were, making sure that that's stable, okay? Bandwidth aggregation as we go forward, not using these singularly, but using them together and possibly getting a better solution. And then big data analytics. How do we manage big data analytics? What's all involved with that? So here's some of the key things that our technology did when we put it in a car. And we did put it in a car. We put it in a Toyota Lexus. We worked with Toyota. We're working with Ford. And these are some of the things that we've been asked to do. Make a super pipe, using all the speeds together, making sure there's transparent handoff between all the networks. We have another system that we implemented that uses your SIM card and the devices that you bring into the car beyond using the mobile network. Because I'm already bringing in a smartphone, or my kids are bringing in a smartphone, or my wife is bringing in a smartphone. And as a consumer, we don't want to deal with more mobile carrier than we have to. So the fewer mobile carriers we deal with, at least in Canada, we don't want to deal with more of them because they're not the easiest guys to deal with. Why not use what we're already paying for? Using that in a smart, optimal situation in the car. And then cloud management. Here's an example of one of the dashboards that we have that shows how we've used a number of networks to give you a quicker, better speed. And here's a real-life example of us using LTE, public Wi-Fi, and a smartphone that's brought into the car together in order to get optimal, faster speeds. And here we're even using multiple networks. In this case, we're using Rogers, which is a network which is like Verizon up in Canada, as well as we have the ability to use multiple connected devices within the car. And again, that's just dealing with the plumbing coming into the car. Quality of service. What gets the highest priority? We talked about EMS, making sure they get priority over the streaming of Netflix or a consumer product in the car. Here are some of the touch points that we talked about that we're actually working with in the car. From our connection management, we're dealing with integration, security points, we're dealing with policy management and handover. And this is what Dave talked about, just in case none of us have seen this. This was not caused by the AV, as Dave pointed out earlier in the show, earlier in the presentation. Everyone's seen that from last week. Thank you very much.